January 29th, 1945, 2:47 p.m., Holzheim, Belgium. A first sergeant walks around the corner of a farmhouse and stops dead. 90 German soldiers are staring at him. Half of them are holding weapons. The other half are picking up rifles from a pile on the ground. 4 American soldiers kneel in the snow with their hands locked behind their heads. These Germans were prisoners just 20 minutes ago. 80 of them had been captured by this sergeant's company during the assault on the village. Guarded by 4 men, that was all that could be spared. Now they're free, armed and organizing to attack from the rear. A German officer steps forward, shoves an MP-40 submachine gun into the American's stomach and screams something in German. The American doesn't speak German. Neither do any of the other men around him. The officer screams again, louder, face turning red with fury. The sergeant looks at the 90 Germans, looks at his 4 disarmed soldiers, looks at the MP-40 pressed against his gut, and starts laughing. The German officer's face twists with confusion, then rage. He screams louder. The sergeant laughs harder. What happens next takes less than 60 seconds. 21 Germans will die. The rest will throw down their weapons and surrender. And First Sergeant Leonard Funk will earn the Medal of Honor for one of the most insane acts of combat courage in the entire Second World War. All because he couldn't stop laughing.
Leonard Alfred Funk, Jr. was born on August 27, 1916, in Braddock Township, Pennsylvania. A steel town, its skyline dominated by smokestacks and foundries lining the Monongahela River 8 miles east of Pittsburgh. Funk grew up fast and learned responsibility early. By the time he graduated high school in 1934, he had already spent years taking care of his younger brother. The Great Depression was grinding through its 5th year. Jobs were scarce. College was nothing but a fantasy for working-class kids like him. In June 1941, with war raging across Europe and Asia, Congress extended the draft. Funk's number came up. He reported to the induction center at Wilkinsburg, Pennsylvania. He was 24 years old, 5 foot 5 inches tall, and weighed 140 pounds. The Army physical examiner looked at him and probably thought he would be suitable for desk work or supply duty. They were completely wrong. Funk volunteered for the paratroopers. In 1941, American airborne forces barely existed. The concept was brand new. Jumping out a perfectly good aircraft to land behind enemy lines and fight while surrounded by enemies, it sounded like suicide to most soldiers. But the volunteers were a different breed altogether. They had to be. Airborne training was designed to break people. 5 weeks of running, jumping, climbing, falling, and brutal physical conditioning washed out half the candidates. Then came the jump towers. Then came the aircraft. The first time a recruit stepped out of a C-47 at 1,200 feet, everything in his body screamed to grab the doorframe and hold on. The ground was impossibly far down. The wind tore at his face. His parachute was nothing but fabric and cord and faith. Funk earned his jump wings. He got assigned to Company C, 1st Battalion, 58th Parachute Infantry Regiment at Camp Blanding, Florida.
The 508th shipped to England in late 1943. They joined the 82nd Airborne Division, the All-Americans, veterans of Sicily and Italy. These men had already jumped into combat. They had already killed and watched friends die in the dust and smoke of real warfare. Funk was the new guy, 27 years old, ancient by paratrooper standards. Most of his squad mates were barely 20. But Funk had something they didn't have: maturity, steadiness, the kind of quiet competence that makes men follow you into hell without hesitation. By D-Day, he was a squad leader. By the end of the war, he would be acting company executive officer. But first, he had to survive Normandy. June 6, 1944, 1:30 a.m. The C-47 Skytrain shuddered as flak exploded around it. Funk stood in the stick, the line of paratroopers waiting to jump. 60 pounds of equipment was strapped to his body. M1A1 Thompson submachine gun, ammunition, grenades, rations, medical kit. The aircraft was at 400 feet, too low for a safe jump, but the pilots couldn't climb any higher. German anti-aircraft fire was everywhere. Tracers arced through the darkness like angry fireflies. The men could hear fragments pinging off the fuselage.
The Normandy invasion involved 13,000 paratroopers from the 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions. They were supposed to land behind the beaches, secure bridges and crossroads, prevent German reinforcements from reaching the coast. Nothing went according to plan. The green light came on. Funk jumped. The prop blast hit him like a truck. Then the chute deployed, and the world went quiet. Below him was France. Occupied France, enemy territory in every direction. The D-Day airborne operation descended into chaos from the first minute. German anti-aircraft fire had scattered the formations across 50 miles of French countryside. Paratroopers were landing in flooded fields and drowning under the weight of their equipment. Others came down in the middle of German camps and were killed before they could cut free of their harnesses. Funk landed hard. His ankle twisted on impact, badly sprained, possibly fractured. The pain was immediate and intense. Every step would be agony for the next 2 weeks. But he could walk, he could fight, and that was all that mattered. He gathered his chute, buried it, and started moving. He was 40 miles from his intended drop zone, 40 miles of German-held territory in the dark, alone.
Within hours, he had collected a group of lost paratroopers, men from different units, different companies, different regiments, 18 of them eventually, all of them looking for leadership. Funk gave it to them. For 10 days, Funk led this group through German-held territory. They traveled at night, hid by day, fought when they had to. He insisted on serving as lead scout despite his injured ankle, putting himself in the most dangerous position to protect his men. They linked up with Allied forces on June 17th. Every single man survived, not one casualty. 10 days behind enemy lines, 40 miles of German-occupied France, and Leonard Funk brought them all home. He received the Silver Star, the third highest combat decoration, plus a Bronze Star for meritorious service, plus his first Purple Heart. Funk was just getting started. September 17th, 1944. Holland, Operation Market Garden, the largest airborne assault in history. 35,000 paratroopers dropping into the Netherlands to capture a series of bridges across the Rhine. British, American, and Polish forces all jumping together. If it worked, the Allies would be in Germany by Christmas. Field Marshal Montgomery's plan was ambitious, perhaps too ambitious. The paratroopers had to capture and hold 7 bridges across 64 miles of Dutch territory. Ground forces would race up a single highway to link up with them. Everything depended on speed, on surprise, on nothing going wrong. Everything went wrong. The British 1st Airborne Division landed at Arnhem, the furthest bridge. They were surrounded by SS Panzer divisions that weren't supposed to be there. For 9 days, they fought and died in the streets. Only 2,000 of 10,000 men made it out. The bridge too far entered military history as a cautionary tale. But Leonard Funk didn't know about the big picture. He only knew his mission: support the landings, secure the drop zones, kill Germans. After touching down, his company secured their objective without too much difficulty. Standard military operations. The 508th was operating near Nijmegen, helping to capture bridges that would allow ground forces to advance northward. Then, Funk noticed something that wasn't part of the plan. 3 German 20mm flak anti-aircraft guns were firing at the incoming Allied gliders. The gliders carried reinforcements, jeeps, artillery pieces, ammunition, and medical supplies. If those guns kept firing, hundreds of men would die before they even touched the ground. The gun position was dug in on high ground near Vauxhall. Approximately 20 German soldiers were manning the weapons and providing security: sandbags, camouflage, interlocking fields of fire. Funk had 3 men with him: Standard military doctrine says you need a 3-to-1 advantage to assault a prepared position. Funk had the exact opposite. He was outnumbered 7-to-1. He attacked anyway. Leading from the front, Funk and his 3-man patrol assaulted the German position. They killed the security detachment, stormed the gun emplacements, neutralized all 3 weapons in their crews. 20 Germans, 3 Americans. The guns went silent. The gliders landed safely. The Distinguished Service Cross came next, the second highest decoration for valor, 1 step below the Medal of Honor. Funk now had a Silver Star and a Distinguished Service Cross, 2 of the rarest combat decorations in the American military. Most soldiers who earned even 1 were considered heroes for the rest of their lives. Funk was still far from finished. December 16, 1944. The Germans launched their last desperate offensive. 3 armies, 400,000 men, 1,400 tanks, 1,900 artillery pieces. They crashed through the American lines in the Ardennes forest, aiming for the port of Antwerp. Hitler's plan was insane, but it almost worked. He was gambling everything on one massive attack: split the Allied armies, capture Antwerp, force a negotiated peace in the West so Germany could focus on fighting the Soviets in the East. For the Americans, it was a nightmare scenario. The offensive hit thinly held sectors manned by green troops, and exhausted veterans pulled off the line to rest. Entire divisions crumbled. Thousands of soldiers surrendered. The German advance created a bulge 50 miles deep in the Allied lines. The Battle of the Bulge, the largest battle the American army would fight in the entire war. 89,000 American casualties before it was over. The weather was brutal. Snow, ice, temperatures dropping to 5 degrees below 0 Fahrenheit. Men froze to death in their foxholes. Weapons jammed from the cold. Vehicles wouldn't start. The cold was as deadly as the Germans themselves. Then came Malmedy. December 17, 1944. One day into the offensive, a convoy from the 285th Field Artillery Observation Battalion was moving near the Bognez Crossroads when they ran directly into the spearhead of Kampfgruppe Piper, an SS armored battle group. The Americans were rear-echelon troops, artillery observers, radio operators. They were not equipped for a fight with tanks and armored infantry. After a brief and one-sided engagement, 113 Americans surrendered. They were herded into a farmer's field near the crossroads. Hands up, disarmed, prisoners of war. Then the SS opened fire. Machine guns, pistols, rifles. The Germans shot them down like cattle. Men who tried to run were cut down. Men who fell wounded were finished off with shots to the head. 84 Americans died in that field. Some survived by lying still and playing dead. They lay in the snow for hours while German boots walked past them. German voices laughed. When darkness came, 43 survivors crawled away and made it back to American lines. The news spread through the American army like wildfire. Within hours, orders were being passed down through units, Germans executing prisoners. Malmedy changed everything. Before that day, the war in Europe had rules, unofficial, unspoken, but real. Soldiers surrendered when the situation was hopeless. Prisoners were treated according to the Geneva Convention. There was a kind of grim professionalism between enemies. After Malmedy, the rules were gone. American soldiers swore they would never surrender to the SS. Some units passed down orders, no SS prisoners. When Funk heard about the massacre, something hardened inside him. He had already seen too much. Normandy, Holland, friends dying in fields and forests across Europe. But this was different. This was murder, cold-blooded execution of men who had surrendered in good faith. Leonard Funk made a decision right then. He would never surrender to the Germans, no matter what. That decision would matter very soon. January 29, 1945. The Ardennes. The German offensive had been broken. Now the Allies were pushing back hard. Company C, 508th Parachute Infantry, received orders to capture the Belgian village of Holzheim. There was a problem. Company C was severely under strength. The executive officer, second in command, had been killed in recent fighting. They didn't have enough men for a proper assault. Funk was now acting executive officer. He looked at his depleted roster and made a decision. He walked to the company headquarters tent. Inside were clerks, supply personnel, cooks, men who had spent most of the war behind desks and had rarely seen actual combat. "You're all infantry now," Funk told them. "Grab your weapons. We're taking that village." He formed a makeshift platoon out of 30 men who had spent most of the war doing paperwork. They had basic training, sure, but most of them had never fired a shot at another human being. Funk didn't care. He needed bodies. He would turn them into soldiers. The march to Holzheim was 15 miles through waist-deep snow in a driving blizzard. Temperatures were well below freezing. German artillery shells exploded around them, harassing fire from the flanks. Funk led from the front, setting the pace despite everything.
They reached Holzheim. Funk organized the assault carefully. His clerks, his makeshift warriors, followed him into the village. 15 houses, Germans in every one, machine guns, rifles, grenades. Funk and his men cleared them all systematically. 30 prisoners were captured, not one American casualty. Another unit captured 50 more Germans on the other side of town, 80 prisoners total. They were corralled in the yard of a farmhouse. Funk looked at his exhausted men. They had been marching and fighting for hours. There was still resistance in other parts of the village, scattered German soldiers who hadn't surrendered yet. He could only spare 4 men to guard the prisoners. "Keep them here," Funk told the guards. "We'll send reinforcements when we can." Funk headed back into the fight. He had no idea what was about to happen behind him while he was clearing the rest of Holzheim.
While Funk was clearing the rest of Holzheim, a German patrol approached the farmhouse. 10 men, maybe 20, wearing white camouflage capes over their uniforms. In the snow and confusion, they looked almost identical to American troops in winter gear. The 4 guards didn't realize the danger until it was too late. The Germans overwhelmed them, disarmed them, forced them to their knees in the snow. Then they freed the prisoners. 80 German soldiers, plus the patrol that freed them, 90 men total. They grabbed weapons from the pile. They organized quickly and efficiently. They knew exactly what they were going to do: attack Company C from the rear. Funk's company was scattered across the village, mopping up remaining resistance. They weren't expecting an attack from behind. If 90 Germans hit them while they were spread out like this, it would be a massacre.
The German officer in charge, probably a lieutenant or captain, began giving orders in sharp German. "Position the machine guns here. Set up the ambush there. Wait for my signal." That was when Leonard Funk walked around the corner of the farmhouse. Funk had come to check on the prisoners. It was routine. Make sure the guards were okay, see if reinforcements had arrived. He wasn't expecting to walk into 90 armed Germans. He rounded the corner of the farmhouse and froze completely. The scene was surreal, almost unreal. His 4 guards were on their knees in the snow. The prisoners, who should have been unarmed and contained, were standing everywhere, rifles in their hands, organizing for battle. The German officer spotted Funk immediately. The first sergeant's stripes on his sleeve marked him as a leader, a prize worth taking. The officer strode forward purposefully, shoved his MP-40 into Funk's stomach, and screamed a command in German: "Surrender, drop your weapon." Except Funk didn't speak German. He had no idea what the officer was saying. The officer screamed again, louder this time. His face was red, veins bulging in his neck from the force of his shouting. Funk looked around carefully at the situation. 90 Germans, half of them already armed, his 4 men disarmed and helpless on their knees, 1 other American soldier standing beside him, equally helpless. The mathematics of survival was 0. There was no scenario where Leonard Funk could win this fight. He was outnumbered 90-1. The sensible thing, the rational thing, would be to surrender immediately. But Funk remembered Malmedy. He remembered 84 Americans murdered in a field, shot like animals, left to freeze in the snow. He had already decided he would never surrender to the Germans. So instead of complying with the German officer's demands, Leonard Funk did something completely inexplicable. He started laughing. He couldn't stop himself. Nobody knows exactly why Funk laughed in that moment. Maybe it was a deliberate ruse, a calculated tactic to confuse the enemy and buy time. Maybe it was a stress response. The human brain does strange things when faced with almost certain death. Maybe it was genuine amusement at the sheer absurdity of the situation, an officer screaming in a language Funk couldn't understand, expecting instant compliance. Funk himself later said he tried to stop laughing but simply couldn't. Something about the Germans screaming in German touched a nerve. Whatever the reason, the effect was devastating. The German officer screamed louder in response. Funk laughed harder. He bent over, shoulders shaking, and called out to his men that he didn't understand what the German was saying. Some of the German soldiers started laughing too. The tension in the farmyard became bizarre and surreal. Their officer was turning purple with rage, and this American prisoner wouldn't stop cackling. The officer was completely thrown off balance. This wasn't how prisoners behaved. They begged, they pleaded, they complied. They didn't stand there laughing while you shoved a submachine gun into their stomach. For a few critical seconds, the German officer didn't know what to do next, and Leonard Funk used those precious seconds. Still appearing to laugh and be amused, Funk slowly reached up toward his Thompson submachine gun. It was slung over his shoulder in the standard carrying position for paratroopers. The German officer watched intently, believing he was finally getting what he wanted. This was good. The American was finally surrendering his weapon. Funk's hand closed around the grip of the Thompson. He began to unsling it slowly and carefully from his shoulder. The German officer relaxed slightly. He was about to have another prisoner, another trophy to add to his capture count. Then Funk moved. In one explosive motion, faster than thought itself, he swung the Thompson down, brought the muzzle into line with the officer's body, and squeezed the trigger hard. The M1A1 Thompson fired .45 ACP rounds at 600 rounds per minute. At close range, each bullet hit like a sledgehammer blow. The rounds didn't just wound, they destroyed everything in their path. The first burst caught the German officer in the chest, center mass. 30 rounds in less than 3 seconds. The officer was dead before his body hit the snowy ground.
Funk didn't stop shooting. He couldn't stop. The moment he started firing, he had committed himself completely. He was either going to kill everyone or die himself. There was no middle ground, no third option. He pivoted smoothly, still firing continuously. The Thompson sprayed an arc of hot lead across the German soldiers nearest to him. Men screamed and fell. Blood sprayed across the white snow, staining it red. Brass casings tumbled through the air, steaming in the freezing cold. The magazine ran dry, 30 rounds expended in just seconds. This was the critical moment. A Thompson takes 2 seconds to reload if you practice it 1,000 times. 2 seconds is forever in a firefight. 2 seconds is enough time for 90 Germans to kill 1 American. Funk yanked the empty magazine out violently, slammed a fresh one in with precision, racked the bolt, and kept shooting without pause. The whole sequence took less than a heartbeat. Muscle memory, thousands of hours of training compressed into one fluid, automatic motion. At the same time, he was screaming at his men, "Pick up their weapons! Pick up their weapons!" The 4 guards, still on their knees, scrambled desperately for the rifles the dead Germans had dropped in the snow. Seconds ago, they were prisoners awaiting execution. Now, they were fighting for their lives. The Germans dissolved into chaos. Their officer was dead. The American, who had been laughing, was now killing them. Nobody gave new orders. Nobody knew what to do in this situation. Some of them started shooting back at Funk. Bullets cracked through the air past his head. One round killed the soldier standing beside him instantly. Funk kept firing, kept moving, kept killing. His guards now had weapons in their hands. They were shooting too, adding their firepower to his. The Germans were caught in a crossfire they never expected, never planned for. 60 seconds, that was all it took, just 1 minute. 21 German soldiers lay dead in the snow. 24 more were wounded badly. The rest, more than 40 of them, had thrown down their weapons and raised their hands high in surrender. The prisoners were prisoners again. Leonard Funk stood in the middle of the carnage, smoke rising from his Thompson submachine gun, surrounded by bodies in the snow. "That," he said calmly to his men, "was the stupidest thing I've ever seen."
The aftermath was almost anticlimactic in comparison. Company C secured Holzheim completely. The captured Germans, the survivors anyway, were marched to the rear under much heavier guard this time. Funk reported the incident to his commanding officer. "Just another firefight," he said. "Just another day in the war." But the story spread through the regiment, through the division, through the entire 82nd Airborne Division like wildfire. The sergeant who laughed at 90 Germans and killed half of them with a Tommy gun. When the Medal of Honor recommendation reached Washington, nobody questioned it or debated it. What Funk did at Holzheim was beyond dispute. Outnumbered 90-1, an enemy weapon in his gut, and instead of surrendering, he attacked. The official citation reads, "He was ordered to surrender by a German officer who pushed a machine pistol into his stomach. Although overwhelmingly outnumbered and facing almost certain death, First Sergeant Funk, pretending to comply with the order, began slowly to unsling his submachine gun from his shoulder, and then, with lightning-fast motion, brought the muzzle into line and riddled the German officer with bullets. He turned upon the other Germans, firing and shouting to the other Americans to seize the enemy's weapons. September 5, 1945, the White House. President Harry Truman placed the Medal of Honor around Leonard Funk's neck. "I would rather have this medal," Truman said, "than be President of the United States. Let me count what Leonard Funk earned during World War II. Medal of Honor for Holzheim, Distinguished Service Cross for the anti-aircraft guns in Holland, Silver Star for leading 18 men through 40 miles of enemy territory in Normandy, Bronze Star for meritorious service, 3 Purple Hearts. He was wounded 3 separate times and kept fighting anyway, plus decorations from France, Belgium, and the Netherlands, their equivalent of the Victoria Cross. Leonard Funk was the most decorated paratrooper of World War II. 5 foot 5 inches tall, 140 pounds, a former store clerk who became a legend.
The war ended. Funk went home to Pennsylvania. He didn't write a book about his experiences. He didn't do the lecture circuit. He didn't turn his Medal of Honor into a speaking career or a political platform. He didn't cash in on his fame. He went back to Pennsylvania and got a job with the Veterans Administration. The VA, the massive bureaucracy responsible for taking care of America's former soldiers, helping veterans navigate the paperwork, processing disability claims, cutting through red tape for men who had given everything and now needed help getting what they were owed. The same kind of clerk work he did before the war. The same quiet, unglamorous, necessary work. For 27 years, Leonard Funk sat at a desk and helped veterans. He rose through the ranks gradually, became division chief of the Pittsburgh Regional Office. Good salary, steady hours, a pension waiting at the end. His wife, Gertrude, stuck with him through all of it. They had 2 daughters. They lived in McKeesport, Pennsylvania, a working-class neighborhood in a working-class town not far from where he had grown up. The Medal of Honor hung in a case somewhere. The Distinguished Service Cross, the Silver Star, all the foreign decorations from France and Belgium and the Netherlands. He never talked about them. When people asked about Holzheim, about the laughing, about the 90 Germans, he would shrug it off. "Did what I had to do," he would say. That's it. That's all he ever said about it.
November 20th, 1992, Braddock Hills, Pennsylvania. Leonard Alfred Funk, Jr. died of cancer. He was 76 years old. They buried him at Arlington National Cemetery, Section 35, grave 23734. Among the heroes of every American war. At the time of his death, he was the last surviving Medal of Honor recipient from the 82nd Airborne Division in World War II. A fitness center at Fort Bragg, now called Fort Liberty, is named after him. A highway in Pennsylvania bears his name. A post office in McKeesport was dedicated to him in 2023. But most people have never heard of Leonard Funk. They know Audie Murphy. They know Alvin York, the famous Medal of Honor recipients whose names appear in history books. They don't know the short, quiet paratrooper who laughed at 90 Germans and killed 21 of them with a Tommy gun. Here's what the story of Leonard Funk tells us about life and death and courage. War doesn't favor the big. It doesn't favor the strong.
It doesn't favor the reckless or the fearless. War favors the ones who keep thinking when everyone else has stopped thinking. At Holzheim, Leonard Funk had every reason to surrender. The math was impossible. 90 against 1. A gun in his stomach. His men already captured and helpless. Any rational person would have given up immediately. But Funk wasn't thinking about the math. He was thinking about Malmedy, about 84 Americans murdered in a field, about what the Germans did to prisoners who surrendered. And he was thinking about his men, the 4 guards on their knees, the soldiers scattered across the village who would be hit from behind if these Germans escaped. So he laughed, maybe as a deliberate tactic, maybe from stress, maybe because the whole absurd situation struck him as funny. And while the German officer was confused, while everyone was off balance, Leonard Funk made his move. 60 seconds later, he was standing in a field of bodies, alive when he should have been dead. There's a quote often attributed to President Truman about the Medal of Honor. "I would rather have this medal than be President of the United States." He said it to Leonard Funk, September 5, 1945, the White House Rose Garden. Think about that carefully. The most powerful man in the world, the man who had just ended World War II, the man who would reshape the entire global order in the coming years, looking at a 5'5" former store clerk from Pennsylvania and saying, "I would rather be you." Because what Truman understood, what everyone who reads the Medal of Honor citations understands, is that real courage isn't about size or strength or training or military skill. Courage is what you do when there's a gun in your stomach and 90 men want you dead.